Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Ah,
I'm Jörg, and here is AJ on the other
Okay.
side of the room,
you
far,
look at
far away.
look at you taking the initiative. Very nice, very nice.
Well, just thought, why not?
In a minute, we have
Hewsons, who are known to actually have released and published a lot of games back in the days, and we talk about Huey Soft and what they are doing nowadays.
before that though. We've got some. I guess some things have happened. I don't know. I
Yeah.
feel like we just did this like a day ago.
Well, add another zero
Mm.
behind it, and we have it more likely.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what happened? Mortal Kombat 11 was released, also on the Switch, which is another one of those games that is heavily downsized when it comes to graphics quality. But the thing that really surprised most people is
Lithuania is
despite-
calling me.
why is somebody from Lithuania calling you?
You got me. No, I'm not talking to nobody at Lithuania. Okay, carry on.
Oh.
I thought that was just funny. I had someone from Sierra Leone call me the other day. I don't know why these numbers are calling me.
Yeah, I actually had a call from USA some years ago, and he was like, "What? I read Germany." Oh, I'm sorry. Like, yeah, well, if you started with 49, that usually means the country code of Germany.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
Try with the 1 instead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay. So back to the news.
Yes.
So, Mortal Kombat 11 was released, and on the Switch as well. And apart from the downsize of graphic quality, that's no surprise here. But what was surprising is it requires to be always online, and that on a portable console, even in single-player story mode.
Yeah.
So, if you are on the go and you don't have constant wireless LAN connection, you are doomed.
Great design.
Yeah. So, I tried it in the train. Fortunately, our trains here in Germany now have a hotspot. Well, it worked. So I was lucky.
Cool.
But I guess that's not the most common thing to happen. So forget to play the game on the go. Yeah. I kept it anyway. Originally, I was planning to return it on
you
day of
said you
arrival,
were going
but-
to give it back.
Yeah. But then I was like, okay, well, why not? And the other thing that really surprised me is you have a tutorial mode where you learn all the movements and key combinations.
Right.
And the tutorial text where to press the buttons and so on is so small on the screen, impossible to read on the go. So I gave that up, and I plan to master the tutorial on a TV instead. And
Okay.
after I know how all these combinations are working, combo moves and so on, then I will finally try to play it on the go for real.
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's basically the news I've got.
Well, Super Mario Brothers on the C64, as we said would probably happen in the last podcast, has been yanked down. Nintendo issued a removal of the DCMA notice. I guess that's what it is. So that's no big surprise. Fortunately, it's already out there in the wild, so most people that want to get it can get it. So it's not like it's not like it's hard to find. So that's that. Also, there was a new game that was just put out by Sarah Jane Avery. I know the name. I can't think of who it is, but she just released a game called Neutron. which is your general, shmup, shoot 'em up kind of, Space Invaders dealy.
It's funny. Shmup wasn't a thing 20 years
No,
ago.
it wasn't. No, neither was SNES.
Yeah. So I still know it as shoot 'em up.
Yeah, me too.
And then like horizontal shmup. Pardon me? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Vertical shmup.
Yeah.
Smubbly-wub. Yeah. Yeah.
Vintage Computer Festival East was a couple days ago. I went to it. I didn't get any footage because I didn't have that much time. I did bump into some of our good friends, Thomas Cherry Holmes and the Guru Meditation, and there were other people there. I didn't see Bill Hurd. I know he was there, right? I did not see him out and about.
Maybe you didn't. Yeah.
Maybe I was just in
Hear
one.
him.
Yeah, he wasn't in the room where I only made it to.
He couldn't be heard.
Yes. And some of my old group mates from back in the RPG days, back in the 90s, ran into some of them, which was pretty awesome. Yeah, so that was that. Cool. Guru Meditation had a cool J Minor exhibit for their with their Amigas, and they had a thing where you could take a picture with, like, they had this big wall thing with a cutout for your head where you could kind of take a picture with them.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
that was cool. That was cool.
Lucky person to
Yeah.
have met J Minor before he died. He didn't die. Well, he died pretty soon after the Amiga was released.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. J Minor. I'm not sure.
94 or something, I remember.
Well, that's not very soon after the Amiga was released, because that's like 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
June
94,
20th, 94.
Yes, that was after. Yeah, that was 10 years after the Amiga, because the Amiga was released in 85.
Still, 62 wasn't an age,
No,
even
that's
in
so young.
94.
Yeah, that was pretty young.
Yeah.
But and there was a guy there in the vendors area. He was selling. Well, he wasn't selling. That was the stupid thing. He had these things. He had these things that were. It was a SID, but it was like for getting rid of the noise on the SID, I guess. It wasn't like a dual SID thing, but he had the whole racks of them. And when you said something to him like, "Oh, how much?" He's like, "I'm not selling them." Why are you in the vendors area, and why do you have a stack of them? Like, what's the point of that? He's just showing people how they work. Like, then why did you bring 700 of them?
Weird. Just looking, J Minor died because of kidney problems.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll do it to you. That'll get you.
And he still died because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Just 2 months after Commodore declared bankruptcy.
Yeah. Well, I don't think he was involved in it anymore at that point anyway.
Yeah. The Indiegogo about the keycaps, that famous one.
Oh, Jesus Lord, yeah.
There was an update on that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he put a photo up where he actually showed the car full of keycaps, ready made and being prepared for shipping. So that means the first batch will be shipped out soon, or better to be said, should arrive soon.
Okay.
Let's see when that update was. That update was on April 8th. And
Okay.
he said the project is still live, but there were no updates because I still have a 100% fixed timetable. The plan was to print all caps December and January, but during the process we found a problem. It seems that my old injection machine has a very small oil leak This caused an oil film on the caps and a crappy print afterwards. Not on all, so we tried first to sort out the oily caps and we tried to wash them. Nothing worked, so we decided to reproduce the complete first batch new. Happily, we reworked the molds, so did not need 18 months as the last time I did it at home.
Okay.
At the moment, 85% of the first patch is done. Right at the moment, I transferred this patch to the printing company. I hope at the end of May, the finished at first the production of the transparent caps, as we will start printing shortly after that. So I can start shipping in May, June with the first sets. It will be the transparent ones. I also got a transparent one ordered, so that means I'm among those, hopefully.
Okay, then.
I know I've told you this 1,000 times before, but I cannot do more than try hard to finish the project. I'm still working on it.
Yes,
I'm still investigating a lot of private money. Best, Michael.
Okay.
P.S. My car suffered with caps for transportation from the production company. There you can see around 40,000 caps in boxes. That is around a third of the first batch. I know a bigger car would have made more sense, but this one is in service.
Okay.
And there are pictures.
All right.
And of course, in the comments, people will still say it's a fake and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe
there's
the
lots of
photos are photoshopped.
Photoshop keycaps.
Yeah. So we'll see. I still have this new keyboard in the cellar, just waiting for the keycaps.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to butcher a working keyboard for old keycaps to put on a new keyboard.
Yeah.
So I hope they will be here with me in June. We will see.
There's a new emulator for the iPad. A new C64 emulator for the iPad.
Nice.
Yeah, no, which is kind of surprising because it's the iPad. You know, it's old emulators through the Apple Store, the Apple App Store, have been shut down because they're I guess because of how they are. This is open source emulator for the 64 based on Vice.
Nice. But I guess it's not for the original iOS because Apple wouldn't support that. You probably have to jailbreak the tablet, the iPad.
I don't know. I don't.
Nah. Apple shut down the original C64 emulator.
I know they did, but that was because of the ability for it to run software that you've added on. I think if it's done properly, I don't know. I'm looking at it right now.
Can you get it from the store?
I'm checking. Doesn't look like it. We'll link to it so people can see what it is. There's no link to the App Store, so it looks like maybe it's something you have to put on a jailbreak system. I couldn't tell you. It doesn't really say it. There's a place to download the source. There's a place to download an IPA, and then there's a GitHub site. But I don't see a link to actually downloading the app. Maybe you'd have to build it yourself. Maybe there's something like that where it's got you have to kind of put it together. I don't know, but there is but it exists, and so that's kind of cool.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's also news. Work continues on this C256 Phoenix or Phoenix, however you say. I know it's supposed to be Phoenix, but they're not spelling it the way Phoenix is spelled. There's a May newsletter that's been out. They're looking for content creators for it. They're fabricating a number of boards, planning to anyway. So it's continuing. It's interesting to see what this is going to do. The last time that we talked about it, I was kind of trying to describe what it is, and it's difficult to do that because you gotta kind of have to see it to understand what the thing is trying to be. But so that's seems like it's going along and picking up some steam. I'm still not sure who the person behind it is. I'm not sure if it's like a Stefan or a Stephanie. The pages that I see where people write it, I can't guarantee they're not misspelling the name, but yeah. So it's a thing that exists that everyone should check out. I don't know, and it's got a price tag on it, man. Like just the bare board is $300. That ain't cheap, for a machine that is essentially brand new, unsupported 8-bit nonsense that there's not going to be a built-in library of software. It's not C64 compatible. It's not compatible with anything except itself. So yeah, so I don't know. Check it out. Links all around, pictures, things.
We know that from Commodore, who did that. Didn't work out so well.
It didn't work out so well because every time they tried to do something, because back then the idea of backwards compatibility wasn't a thing. That wasn't something you worried about. You made a new computer system and it was its own thing, and it didn't necessarily have to rely on what came before it. And nowadays, people are less inclined to, and as we saw then, like there were no developers, like nobody came on to do stuff for like the Plus4 or the C16. They had a couple of software things, but nowhere near the 64. And then when the 128 came out and was backwards compatible, most people used it just in 64 mode. And so still no 128 software came out because the publishing houses said we can sell twice as many if we just make it C64.
Well, there are a few exceptions, like what was it again? V8.
Yeah, the last
there
V8,
was the last V8.
Yeah, well,
there was a 128 version.
Yes, there's a couple things. There's a version of Elite that uses it. This new Mario Brothers uses the 2 megahertz in the borders. Ultima 3, I think, had music with the 128. But the vast majority of the
and there's the
gameplay,
Ryzen demo for the 128.
Yeah.
Ryzen from Oblivion or something.
Yeah, Risen from Oblivion. Yeah. Now that was one that took full advantage. That used the VDC, it used the VIC, and all this other. A lot of the games that did come out for it were 64 versions that were enhanced a little bit. So like Ultima with music, but they weren't like 128 only. They didn't make use of really the features of the 128, like the 80 column chip or the faster speed, or it's like it added a little bit. We had a little bit more memories to play with. Or
well, there was Wizardrite 128.
That wasn't a game.
I know.
No, that's where the 128 shined, was in word processing. I used to use the 128 to write exclusively with. I used Z128. It was fantastic. Or Paperclip 128 was amazing as well. They were good word processing packages, or text editing actually in the case of Zed, but I mean it's not using any of the graphical abilities. The VDC could do some graphical stuff, like Geos uses it, or Risen from Oblivion, the demo. You could do things with it. It's just nobody did.
So that's the thing. To all publishers, make a new 128 game.
Yeah.
The first ever. Forget about the super CPU and metal dust.
Yeah, I see. I can see that happening. Not.
You don't think so?
No one's gonna put together. Well, actually, the girl from the Nibbles and Bites thing, the YouTube channel where they're working on it, she is working on a game in 128 mode.
Yeah,
so
nice.
So she's using the 128's monitor and she's using sprites and all that stuff. So and it's interesting because I think she's taking it from the perspective of someone that doesn't know the system and learning it and learning to code on it, but she's going from the 128 side rather than the 64 side, which is kind of a unique thing because most people knew the 64 and they came to get the 128 and just kept with the 64 side, and she is kind of bypassing the 64 side in order to play on the 128, which is a unique way to look at it, because But like I said, again, most people had that background with the 64.
Well, instead of double tracking, you make triple tracking.
Well, quadruple dragon.
Yeah. Or Gianna Sisters and her friends.
Jimmy, Bimmy, and Wimmy. Yeah.
Yeah. Bimmy.
Yeah,
Who does remember Bimmy? Yeah. Oh my God.
Oh, so you got anything else?
No.
Neither do I. So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go sit over there. I'm gonna change my shirt and grow my hair a little bit, I think.
Today, I'm talking to the Hewson's family, actually. Andrew and Rob Hewson. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for coming on. So you are actually known, especially Andrew, for originally creating Hewson Games.
I did, yes.
That was one of the biggest publishers in UK for computer games, especially for the Spectrum and the Commodore 64.
Well, that's right. Well, it's a few years ago now.
How did that actually start? Did you get a love into computers and thought you can make it into a business where people were otherwise afraid to tap into? I mean, the 70s and 80s were more like people were afraid of computers, and video games were a waste of time considered for the normal layman, I guess.
Well, yes, I suppose they were. Yes, they were very novel at the time. I got into it because really I worked with some computers at work. I worked in a research laboratory at the British Museum in London, and we had a computer there, a big one. I mean, they were all big in those days, of course, but it was very novel. And because we were the research laboratory, we were given the computer to look after. And so I worked on programming that for the work I was doing on radiocarbon dating, as it happens, but that's another story. And so that's how I got into computers. But really, the reason why I really took the home computer seriously, because not everybody did when they first arrived. Obviously, particularly the early ones, the early Sinclair machines, the ZX80 and the ZX81. The reason I took them seriously was because the person I was working for at the time, my boss at the time, which was after I left the museum, my boss, he was an engineer, and he'd seen a teletext television. And I don't know if you had them in Germany, but over here we had a teletext system where some data was broadcast effectively in the flyback time, in the dead time, in the television signal during as the frame was written to the screen. There's some dead time when the electron beam flies back to the beginning of the line, and they broadcast some data in there, and that data was literally 80 characters across. And you could get, I mean, people used to sell holidays, would you believe, on, phone this number for a holiday in Malaga or something like that. I was out one evening with my boss, and he saw this teletext television, and he was just saying, "Look, I've got to have one of these." And I was rubbishing it, saying, "Look, come on, this is crude. What? This is nothing compared with this is silly." And he said, no, this is in your home. You don't understand. I want one. And of course, that was maybe 6 or 9 months, 6 months probably before the ZX Spectrum. That's not the ZX Spectrum, the ZX80, the original Sinclair ZX80 was announced, where you could spend £100 and with a black and white television and a tape recorder, you could have a computer at home. And I looked at, and with a 1K memory, for goodness sake, a 1K 8-bit memory. And I remember looking at that advert and thinking, yeah, this is nothing. This is a trivial specification, but it's £100. It's £100. And And I just knew there were going to be people like my boss who would go, whoa, I've got to have this. And so I thought, yeah, this is going to happen. This is going to be big. Because there are going to be people like my boss who are just going to switch onto it like a light bulb. They're just going to love having a computer of their own. I bought myself a ZX80. I set myself up with a TV and a desk, and I went into the third bedroom in our home because and I sat down with my ZX80, and my ambition was to write a book. It wasn't anything to do with gaming, really. My ambition was to take this computer. What can I do with it? It obviously can't do any real computering work. There's very few applications that this is going to be worthwhile for, but certainly there are going to be loads of people who want to know about how it works. And so I sat down with the machine. I fairly quickly realized that the book, the instruction manual that came with it was, it's told you 1% about the machine. Probably there was loads more. And so I just sat down and worked out how some of the software worked out how the BASIC was operating, and I made notes, just like being a university student, sitting there, wonder what this does. Oh, it does that. Write it down. Oh, write it down. And before I knew where I was, I really got enough material to put together a small book. And that's what I did. And I wrote a few games, very simple games. I mean, trivially simple. Hangman. Lunar Lander was about as advanced as I got because it was only 10 years after the lunar landings. And that's actually landing the spaceship on the moon is actually, with the technology they had, is quite, they were really on the edge there. And you could see that when you simulated that in the ZX80. So I wrote the book. This was the relatively early days of the photocopier. I went to a local print shop and got it photocopied, made up into a book, and sold it by mail order. And so that's how I got started. And of course, it's wonderful. You put these little adverts in a magazine called Practical Computing and Personal Computer World, both of which have long gone in the UK. And I put these adverts in there, little ones, small ads, and people started sending me money to buy the book. And that's just fun. You can't imagine what that feels like. Well, I suppose you can these days. The equivalent is you get paid over the internet. But in those days, walking down the stairs in the morning, and there's 2 or 3 letters on the doorstep. And they're addressed to me from people I don't know, addressed to me, and inside there's a check or a postal order, for an amount of money. You think, wow, people are sending me money. This is fabulous. And it all built from there. So I wrote the book about the ZX80. I did the similar one about the ZX81 when that came out. Because I'd written the book, I then got a phone call this was a wonderful moment, from magazine publishers in London who said, hello, did you write this book, Hints and Tips for the ZX81? Yes, that was me. Okay, will you write a magazine column for us every month this was about the Z. We're launching this magazine called Sync User. Yeah, sure, obviously I agreed to that. Basically a column every month explaining how some of the system variable works, or just basically answering readers' questions, answering readers' technical questions. And the magic, I live in Oxfordshire, which is about 50-60 miles, say 100 kilometres out of London. The magic of this magazine publishers they were in London, they were based in London. They said, we'll send a photographer to take some photographs of you for the launch issue of the magazine. And I was blown away by this. The idea of people sending a photographer from London out to where I live to take a photograph of me holding my book, which they would then, which would then be used to launch the column in the first issue of the magazine. And I was like, wow, this is magic. what's going on? What's going on? And sure enough, the guy turned up, took his photograph, and I wrote the first column, and it went from there. And then I started getting letters from readers and that kind of thing. And I wrote that column for 10 years, from the beginning of the magazine to the end, once a month. It was quite hard work, I have to tell you. It's not easy knocking out 2,000 words, on demand. But I got better and better at it. But of course, because I'd written a book, I had a column in a magazine. The magazine had a circulation of, I should think, 100,000, maybe more, 200,000. This is in the UK, of course. So it had a significant circulation amongst the target audience. And before I knew where I was, people were sending cassettes in to me of work that they'd done on the machine, and it went from there. Most, as you can imagine, most of the cassettes that came in, most of the offerings were, they're just, what can you expect? They're not going to be great, are they? But one or two of them were just extraordinary. Mike Mail, who wrote Night Flight and went on to do Heathrow Air Traffic Control and Southern Belle and games like that. I mean, that's exactly how he came in. He lived, not so very far away from me. He'd seen my name in the magazine, sent this thing in, sent in a version on the ZX81. It was called Pilot. So we actually published a flight simulator called Pilot on the ZX81. Right, and that was a great game for the ZX81, and then he did Night Flight for the ZX Spectrum when it came out. So it started off because I could see that there were people going to be hooked on buying these computers, and they were going to be much more popular than I think. And they were in the UK and probably in Germany as well, but they were absolutely the latest thing, the must-have item. It just the thought of having a computer of your own, a personal computer, was just almost mind-blowing. And it took a year or two for the retailers to really understand what was going on, but only about a couple of years. In a couple of years, they were absolutely everywhere, and people, everyone was buying a computer. And I just saw it coming, and I wanted to earn some money. That was my ambition. I wanted to earn some money. I wanted to have a computer of my own. I wanted to write a book, and that was it.
So actually, it didn't matter for you if it was computer games or something else you made money with.
No, to be honest, I've always been interested in the technology. It's the technology that switches me on. I mean, I'm still the same today. The stuff we have today is just fabulous, isn't it? Absolutely fabulous.
It is.
It's just, it's like a gift. Your mobile phone in your pocket is like a gift from heaven. The things you can do with it. So I've always, it's the technology that really turns me on. And understanding how it works and getting a feel for it and getting involved with it. I mean, I'm just a bit of a boring nerd. And the truth is, it's not the games per se that turns me on. And Robert's much more of a games player than I am. I mean, I don't play them very much at all. I think, okay, it's a game, right? Got that. And I'm interested in why are you interested in the game? What is it about the game that works for you? I mean, that I find interesting. What is it? And it varies for people. I mean, some of the games I look at that are very popular, and I think I really can't understand what people see in this. But even that intrigues me. Why is it I can't? Why is it doesn't intrigue? Why, I can't see what people like in it, but clearly they do. So I'm wrong. What is it that that's interesting, isn't it?
That's true.
That's interesting. Why do you like that game? Well, it's really got this and that and this and that. Well, really? Oh, okay, fine, good.
So actually, that was about one of my questions. I actually don't know how old Rob is, but Rob, were you part of a beta tester for games back in the days, or weren't you born at this period?
I was born in 1981, so I wasn't quite old enough to be around in the early days. In fact, I think I was probably not yet born when Dad was starting to write his book. I think as I got older, I had a little bit of contact with things. I certainly remember going to the Hewson warehouse and climbing amongst the cassettes and picking out things to take home with my sister. I remember when we were older and it was 21st Century Entertainment. I had a summer job after I'd done my GCSEs. After I'd done high school, opening the mail and making cups of coffee for people, and they let me write reports on some of the games, to make me feel like I was doing something. And then I think before I went to university, I did some bug testing for Giant Killers, the football management simulation game you're involved in, Dad. But that was about it. It wasn't really until quite a while after I'd left university that I properly got into the games industry.
Interestingly, you published a book called Hints and Tips for Video Game Pioneers, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And actually, in this book, you write that that Rob's grandfather, so your father, Andrew, actually was involved in the company too for mastering and dubbing cassette games.
That's right.
The whole family is involved into this video game business.
Yeah, everybody got drawn in. What happened there was my father was he was an industrial chemist. He worked on he was in the old days before we had the kind of screens we've got now. We had cathode ray tubes. The big square, big cubicle thing, like great big bottles.
Sure, I have a CRT TV here too.
A CRT, that's right. And my father, Robert's grandfather, he was a chemist, and his expertise was in those fluorescing chemicals which are deposited in the TV tubes that fluoresce when the electron beam strikes them. So he worked. He was chief chemist at a factory that manufactured those things, and his expertise was in those fluorescent chemicals are deposited from water, as you can imagine. So the water's got to be very pure, and you've got to get exactly the right mixture, and you've got to be careful about the glass. The glass has got to be very smooth, and what have you. So that was his expertise. But anyway, that came to an end. In the UK, that was fading a bit in the 1960s. It's long before these LCDs came out, but the industry was consolidating and what have you. So when he was coming towards the end of his working life, he wasn't exactly at a loose end. He was working for another electronics company. But I just said to him, there's an opportunity here. We can set up cassette duplication plants. I need somebody to run it. We've got the output requirement. This isn't all that. I'd already investigated how it actually worked, because basically a cassette duplication, it will still be the same if people are making sets. What you have is a huge, like how far across are we talking about? 30 centimeter diameter, probably more. 30 or 40 centimeter diameter reels of cassette tape, and the kind of cassettes we were making, you could get 500 copies of each game on one of those reels, probably several hundred copies.
Amazing.
And so they were duplicated by these big specialized reel-to-reel tape recorders, and then this wonderful Heath Robinson, we will call it in the UK, contraption for winding that each copy into a cassette shell and taping it up, and automatically attaching the cape onto a feeder tape in the cassette shell, winding it in, then cutting it, taping it again, and spitting out the cassette when it was made, so we bought the equipment for that. My father came along, and got it all up and running, and they got the manufacturer, because he was used to a manufacturing environment. Got it all up and running, and we went into we had our own cassette duplication plant, and we ran that for 5 or 6 years, I think, until he finally retired, when cassettes were beginning to be replaced by floppy disks.
They actually. I think everywhere in all books and all history, and if I ask people, they all tell me that British people love cassettes, even when everybody else around in Europe and especially in the USA already jumped over to floppy disks.
Yeah, I don't really know why. I suppose it probably a price differential, fundamentally. The cassettes were cheaper, and probably the cassette readers were cheaper as well. I don't know why. And you're right, particularly in the USA, the market was all floppy disks, long before it was all floppy disks. But the US market was different anyway, because they had a lot of cartridges, didn't they, with Atari? So they weren't big. I mean, what happened in the UK is the Spectrum established the market, and that was cassette driven, and so that was the first machine, and the Commodore 64 coming in from the States had its own disk drive, but that was more expensive. But it was piggybacking onto a market which had already been established had been defined by the Spectrum, because the Spectrum for a short period was absolutely the dominant machine because it was the cheapest.
At least in the UK.
Mass market one. There were, I don't know if you remember, there were other machines. I don't know how many got to Germany, but there was the Dragon and the Jupiter Ace and the Oris. I mean, we bought all of them to see what they were looking like. How many of those did you have in Germany? How many of those machines did you have there? Did you have any special German ones?
Well, I have to admit, I think the ZX Spectrum really wasn't a big thing here in Germany. No, I remember my friends and my grandfather had a Commodore 64, and then people switched to the Amiga. But the Dragon, I think, was more a thing that was common in Spain, for example, because earlier I was making an interview with Pablo Porto, who kickstarted the video game industry in Spain when he made Boogaboo the Flea for Quicksilver in '83. Right. And so I guess that this machine even made it more, I think, in Spain and Italy and such countries. But interestingly, that you mentioned that there were different media in different countries that led to funny releases like games like Pit Stop or Jumpman, or games like Last Ninja Remix that you could get on card, disc, and that data set, as you would say. And nowadays, some games you rarely can find on disc anymore. If you look on eBay, you can pay €500 or £700 for a single copy. So you're getting poor. But if you're looking for the tape version, $5, no problem.
Really?
Yeah. So the price difference is really intense when it comes to the same game, just a different media that it's coming onto. And there you have games like Jumpman that is available on card, tape, and disc for different markets, and some are NTSC PAL. And that's actually a good question. Were you aware of the problems of the machines when it comes to NTSC and PAL problems?
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, definitely. We moved on to producing Commodore 64 games with things like Gribbly's Day Out was our first one for the C64. Yes, the PAL system, 50 frames a second. You've just got a little bit more time than you have on the NTSC. So getting a game converted for NTSC was not necessarily the easiest thing in the world, because what was happening, certainly with all our games, all our games, because I was partly because of my technical interest in them, I suppose, because you can't help being biased about what you like, being what you're going to be likely to be producing. Our games tend to be the ones that push the machines hard, and as soon as you're in that situation, then converting from PAL to NTSC is a problem. We're also over. I don't know whether you feel like this, but at that time we always used to look at the American system, and the NTSC system. The colours in NTSC are not as good on television, and the reason they're not as good is because it comes from the European system of PAL was developed after NTSC, so NTSC came in first, and the PAL standard was developed having looked at NTSC, and one of the problems with it is that as the television signal changes in frequency, which is because it wanders slightly, then you get a wandering in the colours wander down the spectrum, up and down the spectrum, and so you get this sort of fuzzy effect. Whereas the PAL system, it stands for phase alternate lines, and what they do is, as each line is written to the screen, they change the phase of so they're interpreting it, the electronically interpreting the color back to front, if you like, compared with the previous line, so that if you get a color which is tending towards the red on this line, it will tend towards the green on the following line. Am I making sense? So that then the two, and they're written close together on the screen, so the average effect is you get a better stability in the color in the PAL system. I bet you didn't expect to learn that. But that's what PAL stands for. Phase alternate line. That's where and it's because people looked at the American system, the NTSC system, and said, "Oh, don't like the way the colour wobbles a bit. What can we do about that?" And so
NTSC never the same colour. Yeah.
Never the same colour twice. NTSC. Yeah. I wasn't going to say that, but you're right. That's exactly it. NTSC, never the same color.
Interestingly, one of the most known game in the world is actually Summer Games. And once I was doing an interview with Chris Crick, who was the sound manager of Epix and earlier on Lucasfilm Games, and I asked him, we had games like Maniac Mansion, Zack McCracken, Summer Games, and everybody in Europe remembers the music playing 21% too slow. Why didn't you fix that? And he told me early in the 80s they didn't know. They simply didn't know about the difference, and they just sent it over to somebody in Europe, and he said, "Okay, it works fine," because he didn't know what it was supposed to look like. Yeah. Later on in Zack McCracken, they just changed the scrolling so it would scroll smoother, but they never bothered to fix the music. So
I'm not remotely surprised. I hadn't heard that story before, but I'm not remotely surprised. I mean, the transformation in technology is vast now, isn't it? I mean, it's so easy to communicate. But back then, all this was sorted out by phone calls, by contracts sent by fax. Fax was wonderfully exciting when it arrived. You know, look, I can send this contract on a fax. I used to. This is a silly story, but when we had sort of young people helping in the office, our fax machine sat in the front window, and I said, "Go and send this fax for me." It's going to California, and and if you look out the window and down the road, you'll see it coming out the other end. You know, it's a silly story, but for us, it was magic. A fax was magic. That instead of having to send this silly contract by letter, and ring up to see if it had arrived correctly, you could just stick it in the machine, it would go. So when you say, they never knew that the sound was wrong, I'm not remotely surprised. These days it'd be easy. You'd play it in your studio and hear it over here and say, "Well, that sounds different over here, listen to this." But it would happen in an instant, wouldn't it? Yeah.
It wouldn't happen in the first place because standards are so global these days that
but that's
That's
exactly the same point.
I mean, actually, I was tinkering today and the last 4 weeks with an Elgato streaming capture card, And the NTSC PAL issue is still around. I mean, if you look at the incoming signal, it's still saying NTSC or PAL 60 or 50 hertz, just a different resolution. So the problem is still there, in a way. But I guess people really don't notice so much, because here in Europe, all TVs can do both standards.
Yeah.
But if you, for example, look at machines like the C64 Mini, and you look at YouTube for reviewers, a lot of reviewers in America couldn't get a picture out of it because the PAL version was first sent as a sample, and the American TVs nowadays still can't do PAL signals sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. So
in some ways, the American market can be very backward.
Yeah.
It can be quite insulated and just very difficult. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Another story from back in those days. This is when they first set up. When the first was a satellite linking Europe and the States. And we got the first pictures sent over. This was all very exciting. It was headline news on the television and all the rest of it. But how they used to convert the pictures from NTSC to PAL was actually they set up a television showing an NTSC picture, and they point a PAL camera at it to film. And I'm not joking. That's how they had no electronic translation. They used to say, "Oh, we're going to do this. Here we are, boom, boom." And of course, you can imagine the quality. It's just remarkable, isn't it? What? You did what? Well, it was the easiest way to do it, so we did it. That's how they did it. And that was broadcast TV was done like that. Extraordinary.
I wonder, Rob, your path went a bit different. You are not a publisher primarily, but I think you are primarily a developer, because the way I got to know you was 2 years ago. You were having a booth. I think it's called Huey Games, or if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry.
No.
And you showed a Hyper Sentinel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this was at Gamescom. When was that? 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was at Gamescom 2017. Yeah, so Hyper Sentinel. I mean, it's obviously got inspiration from Iridium's a big influence, and Defender and games like that. Yeah, we set up Huey Games in 2016. I've come from a development background, working for bigger companies like TT Games on the Lego titles and various other companies. And Hyper Sentinel was our first release, and the idea was, get a game out, get a game out the door. Did we do that? Was it completely smooth and perfect? No, of course not. We made lots of mistakes. But that's you can't not make mistakes, can you? In fact, mistakes are necessary on your way to building something. So we got Hyper Sentinel out. We've done some other bits and bobs. We've ported other people's games. We've ported a game to the Nintendo Switch called The Mystery of Woolly Mountain, which is out now. And we're working on some new titles.
Is it out now? Because the homepage still says it's coming out soon.
Oh, does it? Well, somebody needs to update that website. That's probably me. I thought I had, but maybe maybe I got that. Maybe I missed a bit somewhere. Yes, it's out now on Nintendo Switch, and that's from James Lightfoot. So he's the developer. But yeah, we're primarily developers. We're working on some other games. We've also got a Kickstarter running at the moment. You may remember we had the USB cassette version of Hyper Sentinel.
Yes, of course.
And that USB cassette was very popular. And so we're doing a new series of collector's USB cassettes for neo-retro games, starting with Droid Assault. And Droid Assault is from Puppy Games. And it's a fantastic game that has its inspiration in particularly Paradroid. But puts a different spin on things. It's much more fast-paced and action-packed, and you can collect an army of droids to take around with you, and they've all got different weapons. So that was funded in the first 48 hours on Kickstarter. And we've got 17
Impressive.
days left, and we're hitting stretch goals. So check out Droid Assault on Kickstarter. And we're going to do a series of them.
And I saw it's the first project, according to Kickstarter, where father and son are united together again. Because it says Andrew and Rob Hewson, right?
That's right. Well, we did a Kickstarter for the book, Hints and Tips for Video Game Pioneers. That was the original Kickstarter. And then we did Hyper Sentinel, and now we're doing Droid Assault. So, yes, it is Andrew and Rob Hewson is the name of the Kickstarter account. You're correct.
Wow. So how does that feel, Andrew, to have a son that is continuing what you started?
Mind blowing, really weird. I told him forever when he was growing up, don't get into the video games business. It's too
Seriously, why?
It's too complicated and difficult. It's impossible to stop people doing what they want to do, isn't it? The reason I told him that obviously is because I worked pretty hard when I was doing it. So you think, well, you don't have to work as hard as this to make a living. It was great fun, but there were undoubtedly times when it's stressful. Anyone who's ever put a title to bed. Just those last few weeks when you're nailing all the problems, you end. Yeah, look at me, grey hair, baldy head. That's earned. I've earned all of that. That's from. I've got some stories about that sort of thing. Uridium is one. I stayed up all night the night we shipped Uridium. Not particularly because I had to. But you just get so hyped about what you're doing.
Yeah.
That nothing will. Your brain's going like that. You just can't stop it. So how does it feel? Yeah, it's good fun. I'm enjoying what Rob's up to. Sometimes I'm bemused by the interest there is in what we were doing in the old days and the history of it, because when we were doing it, were we thinking this is historic? I suppose in some sense we knew what we were doing was groundbreaking. Definitely, we were doing things that nobody had ever done before. But I'm not sure I ever considered it to be historic in the sense of people later being interested in it as history. Somehow it didn't feel as important as all that. It was just getting on with things. But I suppose that's what history is, isn't it? People getting on with their lives.
I think I've read somewhere, or Rob told me, I don't know, that he kind of were insisting that you write this book. And I'm not sure if I get this story right.
It's in the. I think it's in the foreword of the book, isn't it? You talking about me twisting your arm to write it.
Absolutely.
I did bully him a little bit.
Well, what he did was nag until I gave in. And even then, I found it hard work. It was hard work writing the book.
That was massive amount of work. Actually, it took a lot longer than we hoped, and it was a real slog.
Yeah, it's a funny thing writing a book anyway. You want the book to have a narrative all the time, and Rob puts an awful lot of most of the structure into place. So I was busy. And in fact, the way we ended up doing is that he would write what he thought had happened, and I'd say, no, it wasn't like that. No, it was like this. It was like that. So that actually worked quite well in the end. Him writing it and me rewriting it. The bit I found easiest, of course, was just writing about the very beginning. It's always the easiest because somehow it is the thing that you think about. Well, how on earth did I get into this? What on earth made this start? So but it was good fun writing the book, and it's good fun seeing him doing what he's doing these days. And of course, there's an interesting dynamic in the video game business now, isn't there, where the machines are so fast and can do so much that if I was still a publisher in it, I would be all the time thinking, how on earth are we going to make this different? How are we going to make this special for people? In a way, you see that in television drama as well. They've got to have exactly the same problem in television drama, that how are we going to write a drama which is going to stand out from all the other dramas that have ever been written? You know, there's so many of them, and I think that's a problem. And it's true in films as well. It's not often that a film like Star Wars comes out where you think, whoa, this is different. That's quite difficult these days, isn't it? In fact, you can tell it's difficult because I've just quoted Star Wars, which actually is 40 years old, something like that.
Exactly.
So we haven't had a big franchise quite like that for the last 40 years.
So, Rob, is that how you got the idea of making an Iridium successor, aka Hyper Sentinel?
No. I mean, Jonathan Port deserves the credit for that. I was introduced to him by an acquaintance of somebody that Tim Keenan, who used to work with Jonathan. And Tim Keenan's an indie developer as well. He's working on a game, and I knew him from the scene in Manchester. And he introduced me to Jonathan and convinced Jonathan to come along to our indie drinks meetup that we have in Manchester. And he obviously showed me the game that was clearly inspired by Iridium. And I just sat down, and it was an early version of it. It needed a lot of work, but we just sat down and said, great, why don't we work together on this? Because obviously we'd done the Kickstarter for the book. Obviously the community that we'd been building up are going to be interested in it. And we collaborated from there on. So it was Jonathan's idea, his game really. I helped design-wise, for him to polish it up. John Ogden from Huey Games did a lot of the technical work in terms of the online infrastructure, leaderboards, and porting it to the different platforms, all the different consoles, and we went from there.
Yeah, interestingly, you have chosen the Nintendo Switch as a platform, and as we with Scene World were also in the retro area. I borrowed you a disk drive, I remember.
Yes, you did.
And we also were in the business area making interviews, and people, it was interesting. For example, we had an interview with Konami, and we were asking, so is the new Pro Evolution Soccer coming out for the Switch? And they're like, no, we are waiting and see what Electronic Arts is doing with FIFA Soccer. And though all the other publishers said, the Switch is not big enough, there's no market, and we are not yet sure how we can push the limits. That is something Andrew said early in the interview, that pushing the limits is difficult sometimes. And so interestingly, when games came out like Wolfenstein 2 or Doom, that were called originally as impossible, suddenly all publishers were saying, okay, now it's proven the system is capable of doing something, we publish our games on it too. So what was your mindset of going on a platform with a retro game successor that all the AAA publishers avoided so far?
Well, it's sometimes when the AAA publishers are avoiding a platform, that's a fantastic reason to go for it as a small company.
Right.
And certainly, if it's an oddball platform from someone you've never heard of, that's a different thing. This is a Nintendo platform, and Nintendo often struggle with third-party releases. People like EA not coming to their systems, but it doesn't matter because they've got Nintendo games on it. And we saw quite early on that the indie games that were being released on Nintendo Switch were selling exceptionally well. And it was a case of the sooner you can get a game onto Nintendo Switch as an indie, the better. And early in the life cycle of a system is often really good as well, because There's less competition. So if you can get a game out early, and none of the big publishers are sucking the air out of it for you, then you can do well. And Nintendo Switch is the best selling platform for Hyper Sentinel, so that obviously worked.
And there's another point, which is Hyper Sentinel is a natural on the Switch.
Yes.
I mean, it's a fabulous game to play on the Switch. You know, there it is in your hands, and this horizontal scroller. As soon as I thought about it, I thought you've got to get Hyper Sentinel on this platform. All those arguments that Robert put forward are true, but also just the experience is fabulous.
Yeah, and the screen on the Switch is fantastic. So you're right, in handheld mode, it looks absolutely spectacular.
It's not. It's the others on a big screen still works, but handheld, yes, definitely, let's do it. Would be my reaction.
I wonder, as you made physical releases like the USB shaped, I would say cassette shaped USB thumbnail drive. As you just hold it up, why you didn't do a physical release for Hyper Sentinel on the Switch?
So to do a physical release on the console platforms, obviously the cost of doing that, getting the cartridges manufactured and so on, is quite significant. And so it's something where you need to have the right partnership in place. We did do a physical release of Hyper Sentinel with Strictly Limited for PS4. But the cost versus the risk for Nintendo Switch, unfortunately, is just not there. It's very difficult to do physical releases unless you've got some support behind it. So it just wasn't something we were able to do, unfortunately.
Too bad.
Yes.
Maybe in the future.
You never know. Each game and each release has a different destiny, if you like. And for Hyper Sentinel, it was for us. Let's establish ourselves. Let's get a digital game out there that perhaps. The price point is another thing. Hyper Sentinel launched at £9.99 on the Switch, so 10.99 euros or something like that. And to make the cost of goods for a physical product worthwhile, you need to be double that. Otherwise, you're just not going to make the money back. So it was a game where the price point suited a digital release, not a physical release. But for us, getting a game out was getting a great game out was the priority.
Interesting. I remember that other publishers who also not planned to make a physical release, Limited Run Games actually approached them and said, okay, let's do it. For example, Thimbleweed Park was one of such games that actually wasn't planned as a physical release on the Switch first, until suddenly Ron Gilbert announced on Twitch, and since today we are also physical on the Switch.
It's the same. I mean, Limited Run Games and Strictly Limited and people like that, it's the same kind of model. If you release a game digitally and you can prove that it's popular, as we did with Hyper Sentinel, then a limited physical run can make economical sense, and we did that with Strictly Limited for PS4. It's a slightly different economics for the Nintendo Switch and the cartridge manufacturing. So that was how that worked out. But yes, like you say, those guys at Strictly Limited and at Limited Run have obviously found a business model that works for small runs for successful digital games. It's
crazy, because if you look at the internet, the games are sold out within 30 seconds.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and when we were doing the Droid Assault USB cassette Kickstarter, having done the Strictly Limited PS4 product, I thought, well, that's a really interesting model, and nobody's doing digital games, physical releases for digital games on PC and Mac, and why is that? And I thought, well, we've had a lot of popularity for Hyper Sentinel USB cassette. Here's a format where we can actually do a physical edition for PC and Mac games, and both of them at the same time, by the way, on the same, and also you can have a whole bunch of extra special features on that USB stick as well. And we got funded on Kickstarter in 48 hours. So it goes to show, the same as, Limited Run and those guys, when people want to collect physical games and, want to have that on their shelves, they will, make sure that, they will go for it. And really, that's why they sell out so quickly, because people want those in their collection.
Incredible, yeah. I wonder, Andrew, as you said, the times were over for Hewson Games and not publishing anything anymore. Now, there was, late last year, there was this surprise that suddenly there was a C64 being released, a C64 version for Farming Simulator. A game that people never thought would see a release for the Commodore 64. So could you imagine to have a revival of Hewson Games and making a retro platform game again? Or is that something totally out of your mind, saying, okay, Commodore 64 isn't my thing, or ZX Spectrum?
I mean, my instinctive reaction is always to look at the future. And I can't help it. I understand that people have nostalgia about the past, but when it comes to what you're doing in terms of developing, then you're trying to create something new all the time, aren't you? I mean, that's the whole nature of development. This is new. And so I would struggle to I mean, something like Farming Simulator, I can see why that would work on the C64 as a game.
Sold 30,000 copies, actually.
Well, yeah, no, I was thinking of it working technically.
Okay.
Because that's the key. That's the key, isn't it? That you've got to come along and bring something to this. And what they're bringing to it is, of course, this is a modern game, on an old platform. Let's have the experience of one on the other. But what the limitation they haven't got with that, as you would have with something like Hyper Sentinel, for example, there's no way that Hyper Sentinel could go on this C64. I mean, what was fun about Hyper Sentinel is when you look at it, you think, whoa, all the things we couldn't do back in the day, are on here. Whereas with Farming Simulator, you haven't got those technical issues, have you? Because it's so much slower. To the execution time is not a problem. So that's me personally. I would always struggle with that. I'm much more interested all the time in what's coming next. I don't know what you think, Robert, whether you want to go back to, I mean, you would have to be producing a game that would, in fact, it'd be a good idea, go around and look at modern successful games and think, which of them could we actually implement on the C64? Because there won't be that many.
I mean, there's a difference between a passion project and a business strategy, isn't there? And I mean, Farming Simulator doing 30,000 units on the C64 is actually quite impressive, for a 30-year-old piece of hardware. But is there a business strategy to make that work sustainably? I would struggle to see it. Would it be something that I could do as a passion project? Sure. I just don't have any time for passion projects because we're trying to run a business. But I mean, what really gets me excited is, I've been designing games since 2005, and it's always coming up with new things. What can the technology allow us to do that's exciting? We've got new consoles around the corner in 2020 coming out, so there's going to be exciting new. Well, we think it's 2020, don't we? They haven't actually told us yet. So there's exciting new opportunities that are coming up, and that's what gets me excited is what we can do and what we can come up with and how we can push things, and also the technical ability to write a game for the Commodore 64 I'm not sure we possess it. You know, we'd have to get somebody who's very familiar with writing games for the C64 to work on something for us. We don't necessarily have that knowledge in-house, or certainly there'd be a lot of relearning anyway to do. I'd have to ask John.
Well, at least there, due to the retro hype, there are even new books being written and published on assembler coding.
Yes, so. It's one of those things where you'd have to really go, right, I'm going to write a game in assembler, but and go, I'm not going to write a game in Unity. I'm going to write a game in assembler.
Well, Unity you couldn't implement on the thing at all. I mean, you know,
well, exactly.
You'd be faced with exactly the same problems that you had in the old days. I'm sure the tools are still around. The software tools, it's a case of finding the right people with the tools. And to be honest, it wouldn't be that difficult to do, would it? We all know the names of the people that you'd be. So that wouldn't be so difficult. Whether the books are available is another matter. I suppose they'll all be out of print, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, people are writing new stuff on the internet, and you know the scene is keeping it alive, so it's certainly something you could do, but you'd have to put a lot of work in. I mean, it reminds me of, I was at Play Expo Manchester looking at the ZX Spectrum Next a couple of weeks ago, and they were showing me some of the software, and Gary Biasillo, who wrote Slayer for Hewson and Future Basketball, and he lives in Japan now, writing games out in Japan. He's written a tool, I think it's called Next. It's a music tool for the ZX Spectrum Next, so that you can compose chiptune music on the new ZX Spectrum. So there you go. There's a guy who was writing games 30 years ago, who's still writing games today, who has written this tool in his spare time because he's passionate about it, and you know, to get the Spectrum Next scene moving, as it were. So there's definitely people out there doing fantastic stuff. Whether we could find a way as a business model to do a C64 game, who knows? But I think it's tricky.
Actually, I have a practical example. 2 years ago, former SNK employees who were known for their beat-em-ups made a new game after 18 years. That was the first commercially published game since 18 years for the Super Nintendo, called Unholy Night. and you could only buy it in places like Amazon USA, and I was doing my order and it took 6 weeks to get it to me. So I was actually calling Amazon customer support and I was asking, where's my Super Nintendo game? And they were telling me they didn't expect so much order, so they had to ask the manufacturer to make more units because they got so many orders they couldn't get it delivered in time to everybody and didn't have enough stock. Though this shows that there is a potential for, if you are coming in the right time, for retro platforms. Or another example would be Zem Journey, this jump and run that sold now thousands of copies by Protovision for the Commodore 64.
You're right. There are opportunities. I mean, Tanglewood on the Mega Drive. Matt, who develops that, is here in Manchester. I know him. And he obviously ran a successful Kickstarter campaign and raised £50,000. And he's found that, you know, one of the last Mega Drive dev kits in the world, or, you know, I don't know, in Europe, he's found it anyway. And he's had to go to China and get them to manufacture Mega Drive cartridges for his game. And he's going to do it again. I spoke to him again at Play Expo a couple of weekends ago, and he's like, "Yep, I'm doing another Mega Drive game next." So I don't know. You know, who knows? It's that, you know, there are ways of doing it, I suppose, if you want to do that. But, I don't know where. I don't know. I don't know how you make it work.
It's quite interesting. Actually, a brilliant and very nice guy. I emailed him a couple of times, and so. Yeah, I had some conversations with him.
He's a lovely guy. Yeah, he bought a Hyper Sentinel collector's USB cassette. So there we go.
Were actually most buyers from the UK?
Yes, I think the UK, followed by the USA. I think Germany might be the third market in terms of people who've bought the book and the collector's USB cassettes we're doing. Yes.
Nice. So let's talk a bit about your current Kickstarter, which you mentioned earlier, Droid Assault. What is about that? Tell me a bit about it.
Okay, so Droid Assault is developed by Puppy Games, and it's, as I said, it's a Paradroid style game, except much more fast paced, much more arcadey. So you can, as in Paradroid, you can take control of other droids, but in Droid Assault, when you take control of other droids, they join your group and they all follow you around as a group, and you can switch between those robots at will once you've collected them, and you progress through the levels, obviously destroying other droids or taking them over. And they've got a huge variety of weapons, flamethrowers and lasers and plasma rifles and grenade launchers, and they all have different abilities. So it's kind of taking some of the spirit of games like Paradroid and Quasitron and giving it a kind of really modern arcade vibe. So that's the game from Puppy Games, and as I said, it's on the USB cassette format. So this is a physical release. So if you've got a collection of Hewson games on your shelf, there's Spectrum and Commodore 64 games, you can slot Droid Assault on the collector's USB cassette right alongside it. It is a genuine cassette jewel case. When you open it up, there's the USB cassette. I don't know if how well you can see here on the camera. So it's a genuine jewel case, as I said, comes shrink wrapped, and the cassette pops open like that with the USB drive on there. So that has got the Windows, Linux, Mac versions of Droid Assault on it, plus a ton of special features. We've got indie game demos. So there's 5 indie game demos on there. There is soundtrack albums. There's a whole archive of Hewson magazine clippings, over 2,000 pages scanned from Hewson magazines. We've hit stretch goal 1 in the Kickstarter campaign, which means the Hewson interviews are on there, which is over an hour-long footage, interviewing Dad about all the games. So it's a new collection that you can line up on your shelves. This is 001 in the collection, which is a fabulous number for any Paradroid fans. So you might be able to see it there, 001. And we're going to go on to 002, 003, and we've got a whole host of fantastic neo-retro games lined up for that. So it's great. Yeah, we're really excited about it.
I wonder why didn't you go and decided to use Hewson Publishing, or wasn't it Hewson Limited? I think it was, right?
Hewson Consultants it was originally.
Hewson Consultants, okay. Why didn't you continue using that name? Why did you make?
Well, we don't own the name. We don't own the name, but more importantly, it's a NAF name anyway. I always thought it was NAF, and the story. I don't know whether I've told this before, but the reason we used it in the early days was simply that when I started working on the book, the original book, and the first small ad, I'd already got the company set up because I did some consultancy work. I was a statistician. I did some consultancy work. So Hewson Consultants already existed. The bank account existed. All the background was in there. And so I used that name, and of course it just got carried on. When I wanted to change it, everybody said, "Oh no, don't change it. It's established now."
But you did change it in the end.
21st Century Entertainment, yes, which I thought was a great name. I thought of that one. Although the Americans came along and said, "You do understand that entertainment means something else in the States. Entertainment is like everybody taking their clothes off and doing things like that." What? Oh, you can't please everybody, can you?
But you weren't known for Samantha Fox strip poker, so that was another company.
That was not us. That was not us. There's a fox strip poker. I've forgotten about that one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's famous because Chris Hülsbeck did the music for it, and he didn't even know that he was doing the music for it.
Is that right? I never knew that.
Yeah, he didn't know what he
They never
what he
told
was
him.
doing.
They
Yeah,
never told him. Ha! Ha!
until it was too late. Yeah.
So I think the other thing is with Huey Games, you know, everybody knows the connection back to Hewson, but really, you know, this is the next era, so it's got a new name.
So now you need a kid, and now you need to continue this family business.
Well, I do have a son. He's downstairs at the moment getting ready for bed, so he's 2 years old. So you never know.
Maybe he will be the next publisher or video game developer. You know?
I'm not going to see that, am
I? You never know. You never know. We might be telling him about this interview in 30 years' time.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So, Andrew, you said earlier you were surprised that people are very interested in hearing your old stories. Do you still think this way, or are you more open about it now, seeing that it's good that those history moments are not lost because you wrote this book?
Oh, yes. I mean, I'm delighted. I'm delighted. I suppose when we were living through it, we didn't think of it as history, but I can see the interest in it now. I mean, it's like everything else. We all have our individual interests, don't we? And there is a proportion of people who look back on that period fondly. And I've had so many people come up to me over the years, not just recently, but in the past as well. You know, you bump into people and you say hello, you know, and you introduce yourself to somebody in the right age group, and they sort of go, "That's an interesting name. You don't know." And I said, "Yeah, no, actually, it was me." And they go, "Oh, you know," and you get that reaction. Do you know what you did to me at a certain age? I had this. Oh, I had that, and they all start telling you, you know, what their favorite, and of course, what their favorite game is, and it can be something you think, "Oh yes, I do remember that one. I didn't really play it very much." Slayer, for example, I never played that one very much. Because when you've published, you know, a fair number of them, then you think, "Oh yes, no, I didn't. Yes, I didn't really work so much on that one." But anyway, it doesn't matter. Then you may mention like somebody like Gary Ballestero and Future Basketball, which I did play. So yes, I come across people, and and then other people come up to me, sidle up to me, and say, "Yes, I did actually quite well from pirating your games and selling them in the playground." You know, you think, "Oh, don't tell me that, don't tell me that." But of course, that's what people did.
Mm. So, Rob, now you are in the same business, even though your dad said you better wouldn't do it. What is your opinion about this game industry nowadays? I mean, from my perspective, I see there's a lot of hire and fire, and there is a big risk of losing your investment if your game doesn't sell well.
It's massively competitive. I mean, it's always changing, isn't it? The games industry. It was only 4 or 5 years ago when all of a sudden indie developers were making a ton of money on Steam, and now if you release a game on Steam, it makes nothing at all. So it's really it's always evolving, and it's massively competitive, but it's also much bigger than it was, you know, in the 80s. It's a global industry. There's so many platforms, so many different markets within those platforms. You know, people who play Candy Crush Saga on their iPhone are not the same people who are playing Call of Duty on PlayStation 4 at all. You know, there's virtually no crossover, but they're both making huge amounts of money. So I think it's much bigger, much more competitive, very difficult, still very difficult, but in different ways. I think it's easier to make get functionally to make a game than it was in the 80s. It was incredibly technically challenging back then. Now anyone can pick up Unity and watch a tutorial and make something functional. In some ways, I think it's harder to make a good game, though, a commercially good game, because the bar has risen so high that the attention to detail that you have to go to get something that's commercially good is extremely high. And so it's easier to make games than it ever was, but there's very few people who can make good games. You have to have a lot of experience to be able to make good games. And it's interesting. It's always changing. I mean, we've got virtual reality now. That's okay. It's not a huge market, but it's a market that has come out in the last few years. Who knows what's around the corner? We've got Google Stadia. Google are making a big move into the games industry, and they're not bringing out a console. They're doing a cloud-based streaming service for games. Everyone's fighting over who's going to have the Netflix of games. Certainly Google are moving into that space. Microsoft, we know, are working on it. So and that potentially opens up the market, because you don't need to have, as you don't need to have super powerful hardware to run a game where it's just video being streamed over the cloud. You can have a high performance game running on a mobile phone because it's just a video stream. The latency is obviously the technical issue, but there's also opportunities in terms of multiplayer. You're no longer having a client server for your sort of online multiplayer games. You've got one server that everybody who's playing that game is running from. So you could have thousands of people playing multiplayer without the kind of synchronization issues you get between client and server on current multiplayer games. So who knows where that's going to go? It could be massive. It could be not work at all. It could be too soon. It's an interesting time, and it's always evolving. I think that's the thing that always interests me. The technology is always evolving, and therefore there's always opportunities to be found.
Actually, interesting that you mentioned virtual reality. That was here before in '94, and it actually failed miserably.
Yeah, well, that was too early, wasn't it? I mean, the technology then was not good enough, and now it's good enough. And it's the same with the Google Stadia move. We had OnLive back in 2011, was it, that it came out, OnLive, trying to do cloud gaming, but the broadband infrastructure wasn't there yet. Now everything's moved on. A lot more of us have got super high speed fiber optic, and on the other side of it, people like massive companies like Google who've got an army of engineers have worked out, compression algorithms and all the rest of it. It's the same concept as OnLive in 2011, but time moves on. It's sometimes people do things too early, and the market's not ready.
So, Andrew, I would like to know, you said the game publishing was coming to an end for you. What did you do after, actually?
I took some time off, and I actually spent 2 or 3 years just re-educating myself with the internet, would you believe? So I bought a load of books, and I worked on developing Contract Bridge. Do you play Bridge, the card game? Do you know anyone?
I know the game, but I don't play it.
No, well, there are 200 million people who play it around the world, and they're all my age and older. And so I worked on producing a site to do that for a while. But that's really the reason I did all the technical reading up on that. So I learned a lot about that I hadn't known about how client-server relationships work over the internet, and how the internet itself works, and how the data is shuffling around that. So, but basically, that was just me cruising for a bit, which I felt entitled to do. And then you won't believe this, but it's perfectly true. I set up an accountancy company because you have a technical background. The kind of work that people do in accounts is the maths of it is easy. There's nothing to it really, to be honest. It's all about, does this balance? Yes, it does. Oh, there we go. On we go. And it's quite interesting technically because it's full of rules that are all local to the country. There's no, they all apply in the UK, and the international nature of it is much smaller. I've been running that for the last 15 years. And in fact, I've finished it now. The company's still going. So I ran that for 15 years in the end.
And now you are retired?
Yeah.
In a way? Okay.
Yeah. Although when you've been working for yourself for 30 years, retirement is an interesting concept because it's more like a slow fading away. It's a bit, Robert rings me up and says, "What about this?" "Oh, all right, get involved with that." "Yeah, okay."
Yeah, we're going to Poland next weekend, aren't we?
We're going to Poland
next weekend to the Pixel Heaven exhibition to do a talk there. So there we go.
Yeah, I saw it. David Pleasance will be there also, I guess.
So I've
David
heard.
Pleasance. Yeah, I saw David again at Play Expo Manchester a couple of weeks ago, and he was very excited to learn that Dad was going and to have a beer and catch up about the old days.
Yeah, it's nice to see that you didn't listen to your father and got involved into computer games anyway, or video games, as you may say.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not the first time I've not listened to my father, and probably won't be the last, much to his dismay.
Now the next mission is getting your son into the business once he's old enough.
You never know. Maybe. I mean, look at me. My hair's fallen out as well. So I've obviously been working in the games industry long enough to probably warn him off it.
Alrighty. So Droid Assault is a new IP, I guess. So I wonder, will there be more games that will be coming out soon or next year or something that were original Hewson games, just like a Hyper Sentinel? Or is there nothing?
Absolutely. So we're working on games at the moment, and we haven't shown much of them, but we have announced what they're called. One of the games is called Wreck Out. And if you search for that, you can see a little bit about that. It was revealed on the Kinda Funny Games showcase towards the end of last year, and the other one is called Mechanus, and that's a massive title for us, and we're very excited about that for next gen systems. So watch this space. Great.
So where can people find your stuff apart from the Kickstarter, of course?
You can follow us on Facebook /Huey Games. It's HUEY, by the way. And on Twitter, it's Huey_Games. Follow us there. The website is hueygames.com. Our Discord, we're on Discord as well. So we post the link to the Discord server on our social channels. And if you want to sign up for our monthly newsletter, it's hueygames.com /newsletter. And you'll get lots of lovely, juicy behind-the-scenes information on there each month.
Great. Thank you
very much.
Have a good time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.